Speaker, and I'd like to update the House on the situation in Hong Kong. Mr. Speaker, as all members will know, Hong Kong's historic success was built on its autonomy, its freedoms, and the remarkable resourcefulness and determination of its people. We have long admired their prosperity and their values, respected through China's own expression of the one country, two systems approach, an approach that China itself has long articulated and affirmed as the basis for its relations with Hong Kong. The UK, through successive governments, has consistently respected and supported that model, as reflected both in China's Basic Law and also the Joint Declaration, which, as honourable members will know, is the treaty agreed by the United Kingdom and China, registered with the United Nations as part of the arrangements for the handover of Hong Kong that were made back in 1984. So, Mr. Speaker, set against this Chinese framework and the historic context, on the 22nd of May, during a meeting of the National People's Congress, China considered a proposal for a national security law for Hong Kong. Then on the 28th of May, the National People's Congress adopted this decision. China's Foreign Minister, State Councillor Wang Yi, made clear that the legislation will seek to ban treason, secession, sedition and subversion, and we expect it to be published in full shortly. This proposed national security law undermines the one country, two systems framework that I've described, under which Hong Kong is guaranteed a high degree of autonomy with executive, legislative and independent judicial powers. Mr. Speaker, to be very clear and specific about this, the imposition of national security legislation on Hong Kong by the government in Beijing, rather than through Hong Kong's own institutions, lies in direct conflict with Article 23 of China's own Basic Law, and it lies in direct conflict with China's international obligations freely assumed under the Joint Declaration. The Basic Law is clear that there are only a limited number of areas in which Beijing can impose laws directly, such as for the purposes of defence and foreign affairs, or in exceptional circumstances in which the National People's Congress declares a state of war or a state of emergency. So the proposed national security law, as it's been described, raises the prospect, in terms of the substance and the detail, of prosecution in Hong Kong for political crimes, which would undermine the existing commitments to protect the rights and the freedoms of the people of Hong Kong, as set out in the Joint Declaration, but also as reflecting International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the proposals also include provision for the authorities in Hong Kong to report back to Beijing on progress in pursuing national security education of its people. A truly sobering prospect. Mr. Speaker, we've not yet seen the detailed published text of the legislation, but I can tell the House that if legislation in these terms is imposed by China on Hong Kong, it would violate China's own Basic Law, it would upend China's one country, two systems paradigm, and it would be a clear violation of China's international obligations, including those made specifically to the United Kingdom under the Joint Declaration. Let me also be clear about the approach that the United Kingdom intends to take. We don't oppose Hong Kong passing its own national security law. We do strongly oppose such an authoritarian law being imposed by China in breach of international law. Mr. Speaker, we're not seeking to intervene in China's internal affairs, only to hold China to its international commitments, just as China expects of the United Kingdom. We don't seek to prevent China's rise. Far from it. We welcome China as a leading member of the international community, and we look to engage with China on everything from trade to climate change. And it is precisely because we recognise China's role in the world that we expect it to live up to the international obligations and the international responsibilities that come with it. So, Mr. Speaker, on Thursday, working very closely with our partners in Australia, Canada and the United States, the UK released a joint statement expressing our deep concerns over this proposed new security legislation. Our partners in New Zealand and in Japan have issued similar statements, and the EU has too, and I've had discussions with various number of our EU partners. So the UK stands firm with our international partners in our expectation that China live up to its international obligations under the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Mr. Speaker, there is time for China to reconsider. There is a moment for China to step back from the brink and respect Hong Kong's autonomy and respect China's own international obligations. We urge the government of China to work with the people of Hong Kong, with the Hong Kong government, to end the recent violence and to resolve the underlying tensions based on political dialogue. But if China continues down this current path, if it enacts this national security law, we will consider what further response we make working with those international partners and others. And Mr. Speaker, I hope the whole House agrees that we as the United Kingdom have historic responsibilities, a duty, I would say, to the people of Hong Kong. So I can tell the House now that if China enacts this law, we will change the arrangements for British national overseas passport holders in Hong Kong. Now, the House will recall that the BNO status was conferred on British Dependent Territory citizens connected with Hong Kong as part of the package of arrangements that accompanied the Joint Declaration in 1984 in preparation for the handover of the territory. And under that status, currently, BNO passport holders are already entitled to UK consular assistance in third countries, and the British government also provides people with BNO passports visa-free entry into the UK for up to 6 months as visitors. Mr. Speaker, if China follows through with its proposed legislation, we will put in place new arrangements to allow BNOs to come to the UK without the current 6-month limit, enabling them to live and apply to study and work for extendable periods of 12 months, thereby also providing a pathway to citizenship. Mr. Speaker, let me just finish by saying that even at this stage, I sincerely hope China will reconsider its approach. But if not, the UK will not just look the other way when it comes to the people of Hong Kong. We will stand by them, we will live up to our responsibilities, and I commend this statement to the House.
I will now call the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Lisa Nandy, with up to 5 minutes to reply. Lisa Nandy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for coming to the House to make this statement and for advance sight of it, and particularly for the sentiment of solidarity that he expressed at the end of his statement. We are deeply concerned about events in Hong Kong. We share the government's opposition to the national security law. We want to see real action to address police brutality and the steady erosion of the Joint Declaration. We want the people of Hong Kong to know the world is watching. We also want them to know that the world is prepared to act. So can I press him for more clarity on BNO passport holders? We welcome the announcement that visa rights will be extended. He says they will be able to come to the UK if China continues down this path and implements this legislation. Can he tell us at which stage he envisages us taking action? When will these measures be brought before the House? Can I also ask him for more details about how this will apply? Will it apply to the 350,000 people who hold valid passports, or to the 2.9 million who are eligible? For this to be meaningful, surely it has to apply to people's families. Can he confirm whether this is the government's intention and what assessment he has done of the numbers? The first rule of any sanction against China must surely be that it doesn't harm the people of Hong Kong. So can he tell us what assessment he's made of the potential loss of millions of highly skilled people from Hong Kong? What assessment he's done of the USA's recent announcement, which I understand he supports, that Hong Kong is no longer autonomous? Will he therefore support the withdrawal of trade preferences and economic sanctions? There are implications for China and, of course, implications for the UK, but there are also serious implications for the people of Hong Kong, many of which he does not appear to be offering safe haven. What impact does he believe this will have on them? Mr. Speaker, we've been asking for concrete steps, and can I welcome the fact that the government is now signalling it's prepared to take these. But the Joint Declaration has been repeatedly undermined since 2012, and as the former Governor of Hong Kong put it, has been met with only tut-tutting and embarrassed clearing of the throat from UK ministers. Why hasn't he pressed for an independent inquiry into police brutality? Given the serious implications for human rights, does he welcome, as we do, the suggestion by former foreign secretaries that an international contract group should be established. He knows that the only long-term solution to this is universal suffrage. We must see pressure from Britain on the Hong Kong authorities to begin the process of democratic reform. Mr. Speaker, I was astonished that in his statement he didn't address how the UK intends to respond to the threat of countermeasures by China. It is increasingly clear that we need an alliance of democracies to ensure that we can maintain, as he says, a constructive dialogue with China on shared challenges, not least climate change, while standing up to aggressive behaviour and clear breaches of international law. He referenced the statements by the UK, Australia, Canada and the US, which was welcome, and the additional statements from New Zealand, Japan and the European Union. It is time for an international democratic alliance to come together and speak with one voice. The G7 is now off. The G20 isn't meeting. The discussion at the UN Security Council has been blocked by China. It's time for Britain to be far more proactive. In recent weeks, Australia has shown real leadership on the search for a vaccine for COVID-19. France has led the charge for a global ceasefire. On this, of all issues, why isn't Britain stepping up and showing the leadership that the world needs? Finally, Mr. Speaker, I am concerned that this exposes some serious, deep contradictions in the government's approach to China. For a decade, we've been told that we're in a golden era of Sino-British relations. Now, he has said that we can't go back to business as usual with China. What does any of this really mean in practice? The government has finally accepted that there are concerns about the threat the Huawei contract poses to national security and is reportedly working with other countries to explore an alternative. But will he rule out Chinese involvement in any new nuclear projects beyond Hinkley? With a long and deep recession likely, the need for a coherent approach is only becoming more urgent. Mr. Speaker, we do not have a strategy abroad. We do not have a strategy at home. This needs a calm and sensible approach to maintain a constructive dialogue and build far greater strategic independence. The two are not contradictory, they go hand in hand. And now is the moment that Britain must step up, show global leadership and begin to take this seriously.
Foreign Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Honourable Lady for her solidarity and support as she expressed at the commencement of her remarks. As she asked about the trigger point for changes, I think it's only right, in order to do this in a very careful way and an accurate way, to wait for the legislation to be published so we can see the full text, because of course it's only at that point, or indeed its application, that we would be able, I think, credibly and reliably to be able to say it was in violation with the joint declaration the way I described. I think that's a common sense approach, and I think that avoids China or other countries around the world who are watching and who we want to stand up in support of international law to see that we are proceeding on the basis of principle and on the facts. She's asked about the detailed arrangements. I've been working with ministers, but in particular the Home Secretary and the Home Office on this since last September. And of course, as I said, we will wait to see precisely what the legislation says before making any further announcements. But the Home Secretary will set out the details at the appropriate time. And of course, dependents would be considered, of course. She talked about, and I think rightly pointed out, that the threat to Hong Kong is not just to the autonomy and to the freedoms, but also to the economy and investment in Hong Kong, which the UK and many others have got serious interest in. She's right to say that. And it is the actions of China which inexplicably is putting at risk what has long been regarded as one of the jewels in the economic crown for China. So she makes, I think, some important points in relation to that. She asked about the independent investigation into police and why we hadn't called for that. In fact, I called for it in August of 2019 and made that clear, having spoken to Chief Executive Carrie Lam. She also asked, I think, about universal suffrage, which of course is envisaged in the Basic Law for Hong Kong. I set that out as our position in the House of Commons last September, and on both points I welcome the Labour Party and indeed her support. She then asked about international action. I think the United Kingdom has been at the vanguard. We've been coordinating with our Five Eyes partners. I had a virtual meeting with them yesterday evening where we reaffirmed our solidarity on this point. I've had calls and been engaged with the European Union, who put out a statement not as strong as the statement that I think we put out, but nonetheless shows that they're engaged actively on it. And I've been speaking to my German, my French and other European partners about this. I also spoke to my Japanese opposite number today, and just on the point about the UN Security Council. In fact, the issue was discussed in the UN Security Council, although of course China and indeed Russia will veto any more substantive debate. She asked about the specific measures that we're proposing. I've been very clear on B&Os. Equally, we will work very closely with our international partners on what the right next steps are. I think the focus right now, in order to proceed in a productive way, which is likely to give ourselves the best chance of the outcome we want, we are setting out our position clearly and working with our international partners, and the ball is in the court of the government in China. It has a choice to make here. It can cross the Rubicon and violate the autonomy and the rights of the people of Hong Kong, or it can step back, understand the widespread concern of the international community, and live up to its responsibilities as a leading member of the international community. Would be for China to step back. If China does not step back, we will consider all of the possible actions and measures that we might wish to take. But fundamentally, rather than just wait for international cooperation on the specific issue of what will happen to those that are not willing to stay in Hong Kong, we feel that we have got a duty, and I feel that as a matter of international law, moral responsibility, historic responsibility, to come out and lead, which is why we set out that we will allow the 300,000+ B&O passport holders to come to the UK, along with their dependents, in the way I've described.
Alex Dobbs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is right that we take our special historic responsibility seriously and take a significant interest in this issue. But we know that when we do take an interest in issues such as this, then diaspora communities at home suffer more. Nottingham's Chinese community and the people of Chinese heritage in Nottingham and frankly across the country have had a horrendous first 5 months to this year, with abuse increased in staggering amounts. Can I seek assurances, therefore, from the Foreign Secretary, as well as his admirably assertive role he's going to play on the international stage, that he's working with his colleagues across government to formulate a sympathetic package, a thoughtful way of supporting Chinese people in this country, or those with a Chinese background, because they really need us now?
Foreign Secretary.
Can I thank the Honourable Gentleman? He's absolutely right. I have a councillor in my own constituency, Xinyang Wang, who is one of the most hard-working, not just businessmen, but councillors, and I'm sure we've all got examples of that across the country and across the political divides. And it is absolutely crucial that we say to the Chinese community here that we value their contribution, that our stances in relation to the government of China and its violation of the rights and the autonomy of the people of Hong Kong, who we also will extend warm engagement to and embrace them in the way I've described, with a change of status so that they can come here. And I fully support what he said.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome very much my right honourable friend's statement. Does he agree that China itself is now at a crossroads? It can either be a partner in the international community, which is what we want to see, or take the path to becoming a pariah state, with disputes in the South China Sea, at the World Trade Organization, and a lack of cooperation with the World Health Organization over COVID. Does he agree that if the Chinese Communist Party applies these laws to Hong Kong in clear breach of previous commitments, the world will start to wonder what is the value of a Chinese signature on an international treaty, and that would have profound international consequences?
Foreign Secretary.
Can I thank my right honourable friend? I think he's absolutely right that at the core of this, beyond all of the specific issues that he's raised, the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, the issue of transparency and getting to the truth in relation to the initial outbreak of coronavirus, the wider issues around cyber attacks that China engages in, and of course the issue of the people of Hong Kong. This is not just a question of international law and rights and the violations of those rights, but trust and confidence in the kind of partner that China wishes to become. We, as I've said, unapologetically, we wish to engage with China. We do not wish to see prevent its rise. We wish to welcome China's rise. But I think in the way that the right honourable gentleman described is absolutely right. China must live up to the obligations and responsibilities that come with that status.
Florence Session-Bowman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Foreign Secretary, in your statement you mentioned that the UK will not look away when it comes to the people of Hong Kong. The Hong Kong protest movement has been driven by disenfranchised young people who just want representation, and that can only happen if there's democratic reform. As a co-signatory to the joint declaration, the UK government has a duty to hold China accountable to the promise they made on this issue. So will you call on the Hong Kong government to enact political reform and give the Hong Kong's people universal suffrage?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady? I agree with her. I made it clear in the House of Commons on the 26th of September 2019, my first debate on Hong Kong. So I welcome her support for the position of the government. Of course, the bottom line is we can't force China. But no one is seriously suggesting, I think, that we can, through coercive measures, do so. What we must do is build up a groundswell of international support based on standing up for principle and rights and the rules of the international system to persuade China that it will be bad for China, bad for Hong Kong, and bad for its own aspirations for it to continue down this path.
26 not here, 27 withdrawn, 28 withdrawn, 29 Weir Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the spirit of solidarity across the benches in this House on this issue, can I pay tribute to a previous MP for Bath and the last Governor of Hong Kong, Lord Patten, for all he has done for the people of Hong Kong and continues to do. One of my constituents was born in Hong Kong before 1997, but for one reason or another, his parents never applied for a BNO passport. Can he ensure that those who are eligible, but have so far not been a BNO passport holder, can now apply for one?
Yeah, here.
Foreign Secretary.
Honourable Lady, of course that's something that we'll look at, and I agree with her in paying tribute to the Noble Lord in the other place, Lord Patten, for all the work he did in relation to the handover and as the last Governor, and of course what we want to do, and I think it's true across the House, from all the different parties, live up to the responsibilities we made at the time.
Speaker, isn't it most unlikely that China will step back from its actions at this stage, because what they're doing is a projection of political power struggles at the top of the Communist Party, and if he believes, as I do, that that is possible, will he agree with me that it's therefore necessary for the government to prepare to permanently welcome a broader scope of people to the UK, and with them their capital, so they can be permanently established here where we're still free?
Secretary.
I thank my honourable friend, and I pay tribute because I know he stands for the cause of liberty wherever it may be, and I've always been shoulder to shoulder with him, and I'm glad to be so again. I think in relation to people of Hong Kong, we've set out, I think, a very principled and generous approach. If you look at the numbers potentially involved, you're talking about over 300,000 holders of BNO passports, in terms of those eligible, close to 3 million. And so I think the UK, in the terms that I've described, is doing its bit. But we also need to work with our wider international partners who have significant Hong Kong communities, significant stake and interest in Hong Kong, to make sure that that is a broader international response. He's right to exude some scepticism about whether China will row back, but I think we've got to give it every opportunity, even if it's only a marginal one.